Ruskin Spear was an English painter and teacher of art, regarded as one of the foremost British painters of his day. He deliberately painted pictures that would stir people's imagination and stir up their emotions. Due to childhood polio, much of his work concerned his immediate surroundings, the people, the townscape, and the daily life of Hammersmith. He lived there up until his death in 1990. His parents were working class. His father was a coach painter. He was painting all kinds of signage, and he was painting on the sides of vans. But he was a very skilled craftsman. His mother worked as a cook, and Ruskin was given the most extraordinary set of names, which might seem prophetic. He was called Augustus John Ruskin Spear, but he was always known as Ruskin. There's always a moment in childhood when the door opens and lets the future in. These are the words of Graham Greene in his novel The Power and the Glory. Ruskin Spear's own childhood took a surprising and rather tragic turn. When he was only 2 years old, when he caught polio, there was a big epidemic that raged through West London, which left him with a very weakened leg, and he walked with a pronounced limp. And I think this is an example of sort of creative malady. In effect, creative malady is tragedy turned into creativity. And this is really true of Ruskin Spear. The sort of things he might have done as a little boy running around playing football, that these things weren't open to the young Ruskin. He was given paints and crayons by his sisters and mother. He was given technical advice by his father. He was sent to a school when he was about 8 or 9. This was known as a PD school, and brutally, PD stood for physically defective. But it was a marvellous school. He always remembered it with tenderness. There was a wonderful headmaster who encouraged the boys who obviously did have artistic gifts. This school really prepared him to go to the local art school, Hammersmith School of Arts and Crafts on Lime Grove. He liked to sort of strip away feelings of preciousness about art. He had no pretensions about art being a higher calling. So he often used to joke, I could easily have ended up a cobbler or a builder. And at some level, he saw art very much as a job that he was very skilled at. He saw it as important to record the lives of the people he knew, the people around him. One painting that inspired him deeply was Walter Sickert's painting Ennui of 1914. And it shows a couple on a boring Sunday afternoon, and he's sitting with a bottle of beer and she's sort of leaning against a dresser. And it's a sort of rather grim picture of lower middle class life. It kind of liberated Ruskin. He realised what he could do best was to paint what he saw around him. That would be the way forward. Sickert gave Ruskin permission to document ordinary life, the lives of his hard-working family in Hammersmith, as in his portrait of his mother, done in 1935, sitting, wearing an apron, obviously tired, with a cup of tea at hand. Painted with beautiful sensitivity, it's rather a French Vuillard-like painting. Ruskin had a strange life in a way. He saw real poverty all around him, because in a way Hammersmith is a place of marked difference. There were these beautiful houses on the river full of artistic individuals, and then there was a much tougher world north of King Street. I mean, he lived in a perfectly respectable street, but there were some real slums that he was to capture before they were demolished in extraordinary paintings. There's one painting called Trouble on Paradise Row, which shows a little boy whistling. He's a sort of lookout boy, and there's obviously something dodgy going on. It's a beautiful painting, very much in the spirit of Soutine. It's dark and it's slightly disturbing. Ruskin's Hammersmith of his youth was a really lively place. It was a kind of intense world of activity, and that began to vanish. I mean, Ruskin never left Hammersmith, but in some sense, Hammersmith changed. After the Second World War in the 1950s, when the Great West Road extension drove right through the middle of Hammersmith, effectively divided Hammersmith into two, with wealthier folk living in handsome houses by the river. But during Ruskin's childhood, this was not the case. It must have made him feel nostalgic for the lost Hammersmith of his youth. Ruskin loved the River Thames, and it was the subject of some of his most atmospheric pictures, with many bleak, wintry scenes. There's the most wonderful painting called The River in Winter, which shows the kind of river wall that runs along and the grey waters of the river. Ruskin must have walked by the river a lot, but he was not a plein air painter. He recreated his river in his studio. There was nothing pretty or picturesque about Ruskin's river, but he painted numerous wonderful pictures. The best perhaps is a painting called Hammersmith Bridge, the sort of purple sky, seagulls flying up, and the massive grandeur of this Victorian bridge, its beautiful curving volutes and ironwork, beautifully caught, and a kind of tribute to the neighbourhood, to his sort of loyalty to Hammersmith. The great inspiration was Sickert, I think, Walter Sickert. There was the way in which Sickert captured ordinary life, the sort of fleeting moments in music halls. Ruskin translated this to the world of the pub, and he caught, I think, something of the essential loneliness of pub life. There's the solitary drinker. The pub is a kind of home, and you have friends in the pub, but you might never see them elsewhere. The kind of pub at that time was essentially still an Edwardian pub, with frosted glass and engraved windows and polished brass tap handles for pulling the beer. Ruskin noticed the strange lighting in pubs, with pools of light and dark spaces. And his favourite pub, the Hampshire Hog, the proprietor was Mr. Hollingbury, who was evidently a bit of a character. Hollingbury always put big vases, bounteous vases of flowers on the bar counter. And so Ruskin did a whole sequence of wonderful paintings of the interior of the Hampshire Hog, which of course now is a gastropub, and all the darkness has been taken out of it. It's all painted white. The most beautiful of these paintings, I think, is a painting called Alf and the Canary. And in this painting, Alf's looking up. Mr. Hollingbury had a canary that he hung in the public bar. And the joke was, when the air got too terrible in the pub, the canary would drop off its perch. But anyway, in this dark environment, there's this little flash of yellow. And there were many other pub paintings that capture individuals. And one of the great ones is called Friday Night. And it shows one of Ruskin's favourite pub friends, a man called Ernest Marsh. Marsh worked in the fish and chip shop on King Street. And Ruskin painted a great many pictures of Ernie. But in Friday Night, Ernie's sitting sort of four square, nursing his pint on a green banquette. And on the wall have been stuck advertisements. And you could see it as a kind of proto-pop painting because it makes so much use of these advertisements. And a great many of Ruskin's paintings include advertisements, include graffiti, handwritten signs. Another wonderful painting of Londoners is Ruskin's London Whelk Woman, where Ruskin has channeled this element of nostalgia. It's a magnificent painting of a magnificent woman. You can almost imagine her voice coming out of the crowd, shouting whelks for sale. A whelk is an inexpensive type of shellfish, not dissimilar to clams, very popular in London up until the Second World War. Ruskin's style has been identified as anglicised impressionism, and his paintings are indeed as atmospheric as that description suggests. He believed in keeping colour under control, muting it in parts, and he liked the discipline of a limited range of colours. He could create a very sombre painting and then enliven it, often with a flash of red, that very London red of an underground sign or a London bus. His most important work, I think, brought out his energy and vivid reaction to the society in which he lived. He was made an associate RA in 1944, and he was only 33. Well, that was pretty young to be an academician. But it was something he had always aspired to. And I think that's quite important, because it was a time when most really ambitious artists regarded the Royal Academy as a place to avoid. He was teased and sort of taken under the wing of Sir Thomas Munnings, who was then president, who wanted to sort of shake him up and shake the working classness out of him, make him into a landscape painter, in fact. But of course, that was never going to happen. I think he was invited to become an academician because of his technical brilliance. The other reason Ruskin loved the Royal Academy was because he felt it was more democratic. Ruskin had a whole other career as an official portrait painter, and he was very quick and speedy and professional about this. I wouldn't like to say that his official portraits were dull. Some of them were slightly dull, because in a way the person he was painting, some kind of captain of industry, wasn't perhaps an exciting personality, but that was quite separate from his unofficial portraits. This other world of the unofficial portraits was what got him an awful lot of publicity in the tabloid newspapers. He deliberately painted pictures that would stir people's imagination and stir up their emotions, and perhaps even make them angry. The first picture he did like that, which he showed at the Royal Academy, was a picture of Winston Churchill. Was based on probably a number of press photographs of Churchill on the stump campaigning, and Churchill's talking into a microphone. It's actually a very cruel painting that caused real upset when it was hung. It deeply annoyed Winston Churchill. He was there on the opening night. He was an honorary academician, in fact, and he refused to shake Ruskin's hand. It's a very frightening picture. The actual original picture, which was large and which hung in the Royal Academy, has vanished. And I suspect that it was destroyed soon after it was purchased. It caused such a sort of hostile stir. Now, you might ask why the man who won the war would be the subject of a hostile picture, but there were things going on at the time that perhaps put Churchill in a less than favourable light. He had made an unfortunate slurring remark that had mentioned the Gestapo in the context of the Labour Party, and this hostile painting shows Churchill talking into the microphone as if he was in control of all the media. It really horrified people, and from then on Ruskin tended to have a controversial painting in every summer exhibition. Another completely unofficial painting is called Citizen James. I think Ruskin liked the way Sid James reached out of the television and gave a true, tough and honest description of the ordinary life of an ordinary man on the street. And so for the painting he captures Sid James in the television set, painted from the screen. And around it is his living room, so he brings the environment into the painting, and it's a beautifully constructed picture. Ruskin Spear had a great relationship with the tabloid press because in many ways they shared certain values, and you could say some of those values were important values, that art should be at some level accessible to a wider public. But because of its humour and because of the way in which he painted, some of the grander art critics dismissed him as vulgar. I'm thinking in particular of Sir Alan Bowness. In the 50s, both John Berger and David Sylvester, two really leading art critics, saw there was something marvellous about Ruskin. Within the limits he set himself, he was a wonderful painter, and David Sylvester used this phrase, sonorous nostalgia, that he caught some aspect of London life. Maybe he was, in a sense, locked into a period that was gradually vanishing, because he went on painting the same kind of pictures into the 70s and 80s. So in a way he was painting almost imaginary pubs that no longer existed. By the 60s and 70s, his paintings were really mainly bought by private collectors. He'd kind of gone out of fashion. Ruskin Spear was definitely a socially committed artist, and his portraits of working class men and women were both tender and full of dignity. and that he can teach us things about how people manage and find a place in an urban environment that is tough and demanding, a world where people keep on keeping on.